Our lesson in social studies this week is the Texas Railroad Boom. In the mid-1800s, I'm looking at the illustrations up here. In the mid-1800s, Texas traveled by wagon or stagecoach. Later, they traveled by train. So we're going to go ahead and go over your lesson, and we are using the Social Studies My World Social Studies book. And we are going to go ahead and start on page 286. And we're going to begin going over our lesson. Before railroads, agriculture products traveled from farms to ports by steamship. So before the railroad, they traveled by steamship. Richard King came to Texas as a steamboat captain. However, rivers were only passable for short distances, and roads could only be used during dry weather. So rivers were only passable for short distances, and roads could only be used during dry weather. This is why railroads improved the lives of farmers in Texas. The railroads also changed the lives of many Texans. Trains reached Texas. Texas had only 400 miles of railroad track in 1860. Then a railroad boom hit Texas. A boom is a time of rapid growth. By 1890, Texans had more than 8,000 miles of track. The boom began at the port cities along the Gulf Coast. Then it spread northward. All right, so in 30 years, it grew from 400 miles of track to 8,000 miles of railroad track. The map on the bottom of page 286 says, identify where the Texas Railroad boom began on the map. And it began with the port cities. That's what it said in the text. So the port cities are Houston, Galveston, and Columbia. To which cities did the railroad boom later spread? It spread to the north and west, to Abilene, Fort Worth, move that up, Austin, and other Texas cities. Okay. These developments in transportation. So the developments in transportation, the developments were from wagon to train, influenced economic activities in Texas. Economic is the money. The impact of the railroad boom in Texas was huge. Cities and towns sprang up along the new railroad lines. That is one positive impact. Businesses, number 2, businesses could now ship and receive goods quickly. That is a second positive result of having trains in Texas. Texans could visit other parts of the state and the nation more easily. That is a third positive impact. Some railroads were linked to other lines in the United States and to lines in Mexico. This let Texans trade with other states and with Mexico. So they didn't have to stay just in the nearby cities. They were able to put their products on trains and were able to go long distances. Railroads did not help everyone. Okay, so these are going to be, since it did not help everyone, these are going to be the negative reasons. The negative reasons. All right. American Indian life was negatively affected by the changes in Texas. Let's see how it negatively impacted American Indians. Tracks 1. Tracks were laid across American Indian lands, so they lost land that they could live on. They ended up putting tracks on it, so they had to find new land. Number 2, the environment also suffered. Number 3, railroad companies slaughtered buffalo on and off American Indian land. So that was the third negative impact when it came to railroads and Native American Indians. This loss of buffalo affected American Indians who relied on the buffalo for food and clothing. All right, question number 2. And if we look at this illustration right here, this is many of the workers who built Texas railroads were Chinese. We're going to be reading about them in a few minutes. All right, so it says examine the effects the railroad had on American Indian life in Texas. And we read here's the fourth one. We read 4 different effects, negative effects that it had on American Indians. So we're going to put 1, that the American Indians lost land to the railroads. And we're going to put 2, that there were fewer buffalo which they depended on for food and clothing. Okay. I want you to take a few minutes to answer this question. How might a train trip be different from a stagecoach trip? You're going to list some ways. So I'm going to write my ways, and then you can think of maybe 2 other ways that it would be different from riding a wagon to riding a train. So my examples, a train would be faster. And I want you to try to come up with your own differences, your own ideas. Another one would be that the train would be more comfortable. And I want you to, like I said, write down the difference between wagons and trains. Okay, so we're going to finish off this page and go to the next one. Newcomers arrive by train. Railroads brought new settlers to Texas because just how Texans could leave Texas on the railroad, on the tracks, the railroad train, other people could come to Texas. So people from other states moved to Texas by train. Others came from foreign countries by ship and then used trains to travel to their new homes in Texas. One group of newcomers were Chinese. And we're going to read about how they impacted the railroads. All right, thousands of Chinese workers came to Texas to build the railroad. So they actually had a job to build the railroads. The workers laid track under difficult conditions. Most earned $20 a month, plus food and shelter. Some saved their money and returned to China. So some of them returned to China, but others stayed after the railroads were built and found new jobs. All right, so with that, So with that, Texas is known as a melting pot. And what does that mean? That means that we have many different cultures. So people from foreign countries came to Texas. All right. Oops, sorry. Okay. So let's read about boom times. During the railroad boom from 1870 to 1900, the population of Texas more than doubled. It grew from 80,000 to more than 2 million people. These newcomers brought their ideas, their cultures, their religion, and music and art with them. So this is why we have a melting pot. We have many different cultures in Texas, and one of the reasons was during this time, different foreign countries, different cultures were arriving to live here in Texas. The locomotive or train steam engine was also an engine of change. The impact of the railroads on life in Texas and the changes to major industries ran deep. Railroad companies also impacted the farming industry. So they also impacted the farming industry. The railroads earned money. They earned money by shipping out farm crops and bringing in farm supplies throughout Texas and other parts of the country. So they encouraged farmers to try new and better ways to raise crops. So the farmers would pay the railroad company to send their product or their cotton to another place, and they would pay them to transport it over there. So of course the railroad company would encourage the farmers to make more crops. If farmers were successful, the railroads would be too. Okay, so cause and effect. Cause is why something happens, and effect is what happened. All right, railroads ran home seeker trains. So why did railroads run home seeker trains? Because there were people who found homes in Texas. And they became paying passengers. They would have to pay, just like when you get on a train now. And that's why it was a home seeker, because they were seeking for homes. All right, railroad encouraged farmers. So why did railroads encourage farmers to use better farming methods? Because if farmers were successful, the railroads would be too. So of course the railroads wanted the farmers to make money, because if they make money, the railroads make money. All right, the last page. Locomotives were powered by steam. So locomotives, they were powered by steam. So the railroads needed